And welcome, everyone, to Rock M Radio. This is a brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We are live on YouTube for our Rock M Plus subscribers. It is Season 9 already, and we're here to talk about your Missouri Basketball Tigers, and can't claim that we're the only podcast anymore. Sadly, somebody else started one. Jerks. Kidding. So, it's been a week since we've talked. Oh, I should introduce myself if you aren't familiar. I'm Sam Snelling. I'm the host. With me, Matt Harris. He's the co-host. Matt, how are you?
I'm well. I'm looking at a landscape of some close-by games tonight, which makes me feel good about or slightly better about the final 4 minutes of basketball I watched on Monday night. So, thanks to the rest of the SEC for, saying, you know what? Solidarity, brother. We're going to limp through against teams that are sub 200 in KenPom as well. We're going to join you in that effort of underwhelming performances and killing our own KenPom ratings.
Yeah, I was. I did watch Kentucky get handled by Michigan State. For anybody that didn't watch that game,
so that's a polite way to say it.
Kentucky lost. I don't want to push any panic button for any Wildcats fans out there, but I think this could kind of come down to a little bit of a case of did you make your threes? I think Kentucky is a little bit of a danger zone because they're they are playing without their point guard. I think that's going to hurt them a little bit. But they shot horribly from 3-point range, and they've got a pretty good shooting team. Michigan State doesn't really take a lot of threes, and they made like 11 or 12 or something. So I know that that's something that we constantly kind of bring up as far as like what kind of win was this? Was it a game where you made your threes? I think there's a little bit of the element of Kentucky did not, Michigan State did. I think Kentucky's still going to be really good. Now, are they going to be like Final Four national championship good? I don't know. They probably need a point guard to do that.
Yeah.
The other games are interesting. Like I saw the Arkansas score. Winthrop's not terrible though, right? Aren't they top 150?
I had to check. I thought they were lower this year. I will confess I have not looked at the SoCon recently since
127.
Or they're Big South. Oh yeah, they are. They're Big South. That's probably why. That's a nice quad 2 or 3 game in Fayetteville right now. The big game that I'm monitoring is LSU is hosting Alcorn State, and it is a 9-point game in Baton Rouge with about 17 minutes left there. LSU is up 6 at half, so they're going to hope to stretch it. Ole Miss was only up 8 on Austin Peay. They've kind of stretched that out now to 17 or 18, so that those two are probably going to go the way we think. But that Winthrop Arkansas game might be worth catching if we get off here earlier, the final couple minutes of that one. But speaking of shooting variance, we saw that last week against Minnesota. We saw that against Missouri and Minnesota, because that's what people are here. They're here to just talk about the Missouri basketball team, Sam. And
M-I-Z.
M-I-Z. Z-O-U.
All right, yeah, let's talk about this. So last week, Mizzou played Minnesota, and people were clowning the Tigers in the first half, mainly like the first half. They were not playing well. They kind of got it going a little bit halfway through the first half and actually went into the locker room with a lead. And then things fell apart for the Gophers in the second half, as can happen to a lot of teams at Mizzou Arena, especially with Dennis Gates and his team. They get a few turnovers, get a few runouts, hit a few threes. Next thing you know, it's like a 12-1 run. I think what was the final run, the big one that they have? Was it like 20-1 or something like that?
23-1 or something like that.
23-1, like just an insane run. I think Minnesota is playing a little shorthanded. I thought they came out with a good game plan. Mm-hmm. And they did force Missouri to kind of play their pace for most of the first half and really a lot of the second half as well. They obviously hit the glass hard. And Nico Medved does run some good offense. He just doesn't quite have the dudes just yet. Then they didn't shoot the ball well, especially Cade Tyson, who's a guy I think is a good shooter, has proven that he's a good shooter, and he really struggled. Missouri sort of, turned things up and ran away with it there.
Yeah.
What were your impressions of the old Gophers matchup?
I think, I wrote about this kind of in lineup review. I think the one thing Minnesota showed was maybe sort of the limits of what this jumbo starting lineup can be against a team that's solid. Minnesota's not, I think, a team that's going to contend for a tournament bid this year, but they are probably going to be a top 100 team. So that's a quality opponent, in the sport. That's a better matchup than you're going to see probably at this stage for Missouri. And I think the one thing that, if you go back and you watch that game again, I think going big makes sense in a certain way. Like coming out of the huddle, it looks really imposing, but you watched how Minnesota played. They were running Cade Tyson off a lot of screening action. That meant that Javon Porter was having to try and chase him around screens. That didn't go well. I think there were moments where you can tell that like the switching, if they get into off-ball switches between Mark and Javon, there were issues communicating them, and then they lose shooters. And the biggest thing too is, it's great that Sean, Phillips has a 42-inch vertical and is 7 foot tall, but he gave up 3 offensive rebounds in the first 4 minutes, including 2 on the same possession. Like, if you're not able to track shooters, if you can't handle switches and you can't hit guys on box outs, it doesn't matter how big you are. And we've seen, to a certain extent, some of this in other games. Like, Semo was able to isolate Javon out on the perimeter and switches and get him on and get smaller guys on him and drive him. We've seen Mark Mitchell, have some issues in, pick and pops and in off-ball screening action, getting around and kind of navigating, getting skinny. We've seen at times that, Sean Phillips can get a little bit lost in the shell. Sometimes he's not always maybe the quickest to react and rotate. So the jumbo lineup, I think, works great in theory, but when you watch it in, practice, there are issues that have cropped up. And, Missouri didn't rebound well enough out of it either. And it gave Minnesota second chances. And I think the other thing that struck me about that lineup was when you play Sean Phillips in the post, you're dragging another defender into the lane and creating more traffic for Mark Mitchell to navigate, particularly if he wants to attack from the slot or from the mid post or from the elbow. Missouri got around that. We can talk about how they adjusted to it, but I just think, if you're going to try and play high-low with Sean, he's got to be better about valuing the ball. He can't have a 20 or 30% turnover rate. But I think you're also creating a lot of congestion in spots and in gaps where Mark Mitchell wants to drive. And in that lineup, you don't really have a lot of shooting, so you can do what Minnesota did, which is just say, all right, we're going to shrink the floor, we're going to front Sean, and we're going to see if you guys can drive through us, and we're going to stunt to gaps. And so I just think it works in theory. It sounds great in theory, but then you see some issues defensively with guys who maybe are a little bit out of position or doing things they're not great at. And I think it creates congestion and sort of takes away from what your best player does on offense, because you're trying to play through the post with a guy who's never really been a great post-up option, and you're not having a lot of shooting, so you're just telling teams to shrink the floor even more. I didn't think it worked really well. And then when Missouri switched to a zone, they brought in Luke Northweather, who can space out and take a defender out of the paint. They started to get some rhythm. They started to get some stops. Rebounding was harder because it's hard to rebound out of a zone. But I just think when they went to a lineup that wasn't jumbo, they started to find some rhythm and they started to get some things going. So I think that was sort of the biggest thing I took away from it, was in a game where you wanted to see this setup, this starting five, impose its will. It didn't happen. In fact, it probably created some drag on them. And they overcame it as they went along, but I felt like they sort of handicapped themselves out of the gate with that lineup.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've sort of been watching pretty acutely at the beginning of the season and trying to sort of figure out, where they're going with this. Again, like you mentioned that it does look imposing coming out of the lineup. I think it can be effective, as long as you're playing teams like they played last night, Prairie View A&M, you can really exploit. Howard as a team, I thought it was somewhat effective against. But I keep going back to, like, who are Missouri's best players? And I think everybody would very easily point to Mark Mitchell and Robinson. Mark Mitchell is all SEC level, and I don't know what NBA scouts are telling him. I don't know what agents are telling him as far as development for the next level. But Mark is a dude at the 4 spot.
Yeah.
An absolute dude. And there aren't very many people in the country who can guard him at the 4 spot. I don't know why you would take away such a big advantage. And having Mark at least at the 4, and even sometimes, in some games and some matchups, playing him at the 5. I think when you're looking at what is going to make Missouri like a great basketball team, it's going to be Mark Mitchell, and it's going to be Anthony Robinson, and obviously, some of the other guys, are going to be included in that. But the main crux of this team being good is the fact that they were bringing back somebody like Mark Mitchell. And so I think what you do is you start with what are the ways that we're going to, best take advantage of this guy at the 4 spot. And the best thing that you can do is create lanes for him by having floor spacers around him. And that's why the lineups with Luke Northweather work. It's why I think lineups with, Javon Porter work. But once you bring in Mark and Javon and Sean and Sebastian, that's basically, 4 guys you really don't mind if they're shooting a lot of threes.
Yeah.
And then it makes Anthony Robinson's job more difficult. It makes Mark Mitchell's job more difficult. And so I like when we're talking about what we've seen so far this year, like I feel like, and maybe this is all, locker room stuff and what you're trying to kind of figure out, to manage different personalities and egos and all these kinds of things. And this is the way that we think it works best, but I just can't get away from the fact that when you go with those lineups, you take one of your biggest strengths and you make it weaker, and that's basically crowding up the lane for Mark Mitchell.
You go back and you watch what made him successful when Mark got going in the first half, but before the 8-point play in the second half, there were 3 or 4 possessions in a row where they would just come down, run a trigger action, flow to an empty side of the floor, and just clear out for Mark and say, Mark, we set a basic ball screen, or we reversed it to you, or we did whatever. We're going to let you drive at Jalen Crocker Johnson, or we're going to let you attack Cade Tyson. And that's what the offense was, and it worked really, really well. And then one of the touches in that 8-point possession was an inbound play to Mark Mitchell, posting up on an empty side of the floor on the right block and just feasting on our defender. Like, they just stripped it down to the studs, and it was that. And it was 4 guys spread around the floor. And they killed them. And I think the other thing it did too was, you get into situations, I think, where Luke Northweather, I think you can attack him in space, and I think there are going to be questions there. But one thing that Luke does really, really well is he can anchor the back line. He understands where to be as the low help guy. He understands that when a driver comes in, he just needs to play with verticality. He's not even trying to block the shot. He's just trying to create a contest there, and he usually hits pretty well on a box out. Like, Luke Northweather's not an imposing backline defender. He's just positionally sound, times up verticality pretty well. And if you watch a game long enough, you go, oh yeah, he's in the right spot and he's doing the right thing. And if Missouri's doing its job in boxing out, things are pretty well. And I think that that's sort of what it comes down to is when this team does the very boring things of being in position, boxing out, getting rebounds, and they're able to push on the secondary break, you can see how it can just overwhelm a team like Minnesota. Minnesota could not get second possessions and stickbacks or makes to get back and set up their defense. They had to get back and they had to try and run with Missouri, and that didn't go well. And then when Missouri came down, they could space the floor and they just let Mark Mitchell go and attack out of basic action. So I think that that's just the thing here is, what are they trying to achieve with the jumbo lineup? That they can't get done, anywhere else. And, we saw it a little bit even against, Alcorn last night. Like the jumbo lineup on Monday night wasn't bad, but the better lineups had Northweather at the 5, Mark at the 4, and then Jordan, Jacob Cruz was stroking ball and playing pretty well that night. But the week before it was Jaden Stone. So when they're playing with Mark at the 4 and, they can mix in Javon there at the 4 sometimes and they can, maybe slide into the 5, things just look more fluid and they look a little bit easier to operate, for this team. And I'm not sure when you call time on trying to make a jumbo lineup work, because it worked against Howard and it worked last night. It got off to a 10-0 start against SEMO, but then defensively it fell apart. And, it kind of staggered them a little bit against Minnesota. So we'll see what it does. I imagine, we'll probably see it again when South Dakota comes here. Maybe we see it going to the Notre Dame game, but I'm curious to see what happens, if it's Kansas or Illinois that, sees that and, what they do with it. So they have their objectives. I think they're trying to test some things out as always, but it doesn't look like a decisive advantage to me when I watch it on the floor. And so.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about last night, because I wrote about it in study hall, and one of the things that Missouri did really well last year is they stopped the kind of garbage time leaks that we saw a lot in year one and even a little in year two before things kind of got really crappy. And that didn't happen last night. Missouri got out to a 35-point lead, was their largest lead. Jacob Cruz just knocked in like 2 3-pointers in a row. And then I thought they were really trying to find him on the next possession. Yeah. Passed up a couple good opportunities just trying to find Cruz. And it's no, just go get good shots. You've got these guys reeling. They didn't. And then for the next 5 or so minutes, it was kind of back and forth. It was
a
still
stalemate.
It was about 30 or so when Prairie View kind of made their move. And again, it effectively doesn't matter, from a standpoint of win and losing the game. It really sours your, the taste of having to watch the last 5 minutes. Basically, a bunch of turnovers, Prairie View making a bunch of threes, going to the free throw line a lot, and I it's a hard sort of balance to walk when you're talking about the game, because the first 30 to 35 minutes were everything you needed and wanted it to be. The last 5 to 10 minutes were a train wreck. And again, one of the things that they did well last year is they kind of stopped, having those moments. They would just sort of put teams away. Maybe some of that is their depth overall was a little better last year. The depth that they have this year are guys that are, sitting out. And it really just, I went back and watched all of it today, and I didn't come away feeling any better. Tio Barrett's got to take better care of the ball. Nick Randall, I don't know what was going through his mind, but he was just an insane person on the floor. Just making insane decisions, going out of his way to like body check a guy that, and I went back and I like kind of watched him like, surely there was like another elbow or something that this guy threw that like made him, nope, there was none of that. He just like beeline to a guy and like body checked him. And, like barreling over, a smaller guy when all I have to do is rise up over and just shoot over the top of him. But, it's all these things. And it's annoying, because you do want to win those games by at least the margin, right? We talk about analytics. The analytics, stuff, does impact your seed and all that kind of stuff. It won't really, go crazy for your like wins above bubble, which seems to be a pretty important statistic. But like, you want to look good, right? You want to have your defense rated well. You want to have your offense rated well, and that dings it a little bit. So I wanted to kind of bring it up. I realized like we don't have to spend a whole lot of time talking about. They beat Prairie A&M. 30 minutes, 35 minutes was everything that you wanted, and then like I can't imagine the locker room was all that thrilled. Coaches probably had a few things to say post game.
No, I think I think the one thing that you liked about the team for most of last year was they handled their business. They were able to tinker with lineups. They were able to experiment. They were able to do all the things you want to do in a bye game in this situation, and that is try different combos out, throw stuff against the wall, but still practice margin control, still play sound, still play intelligently. And, the last 4 minutes, I think, last night was clearly not that. I haven't gone back to do the rewatch. I'll probably do that tomorrow. But I just think the one thing it did for me is it kind of sullied. I think what's been a pretty quiet trend of Missouri in normal time, and that's when the game is still up for grabs, steadily bringing down its defensive efficiency. Against SEMO in normal time, it allowed 110 points per 100 possessions. Against VMI, that came down to 93 points per 100 possessions. Against Minnesota, it came down to 90.6, and last night it was at 78 before garbage time. And then they allowed a 130 in garbage time. So,
to Prairie View A&M, oh god,
no, I was wrong. 125.9 in garbage time. They had a minus 30 net rating to the number 330 team in the country, and will it kill them come March? Probably not. But I think it's one of those things where you're doing the thing you needed to absolutely do, and that is just be consistent, be steady, be solid, and then it just. And on the TO thing, I posted today. I went through over on our board and kind of did a 5-game review of what the lineup data is saying, and Watkins also did kind of a mini verdict on it. And if you look at what TO's doing, his points per shot is really good. It's nearly 1.5 points per shot on 20% usage. That's really, really good. His defensive efficiency is in the 67th percentile nationally. That's really solid. When he drives the ball and he plays aggressively, he's drawing a foul about 35% of the time. That's good. His assist rate's around 21. That's really good for a backup point guard. And then he's coughing the ball up 35 to 36% of the time. And you just cannot give the ball away every third time you touch it. And it's literally dragging his offensive efficiency down into the low 80s per 100 possessions because he's just been a turnover machine. And more than anything else, I think what that garbage time, display meant to me was we want to see Ant Robinson's offensive usage go up. We want to see it around 22 or 23%. But that's a hefty workload if you're playing 30 or 31 minutes a game because you don't have a backup point guard you trust. Yeah. You can lift Ant's usage rate and give him more touches if you know we can play him 26 minutes a game and we can trust that T.O.'s going to come in, get us into good offense, pick his spots, guard, and be a good ball mover for us. So that's really what it comes down to. It's a very boring thing. I don't need T.O. to make a big jump. I don't need him to make an Ant jump. that we saw last year. You just need him to be a solid guy who can come down and give you 14 minutes a game of doing a lot of stuff that he does really well. I mean, he's got to stop with the body check fouls. He and Seb both have to learn that refs are calling that and value the ball. But you can, if you look at it and you watch him play, he's in so many ways, he's close to being a pretty solid backup point guard. Except the one thing you have to have a point guard too, and
not turn the ball over.
Not turn the ball over. So I think that's sort of the thing that got me last night was that was an opportunity for T.O. to say, I'm going to land the plane. You know, Dennis didn't pull him. You know, you look at it. Dennis lifted Ant with 5:56 left. He put Sebastian Mack on the floor, his starting combo guard. He put Jaden Stone out there, and he put Luke Northweather out there. So he put guys who had been playing well alongside T.O. and said, you know, Nick Randall was there for a little bit of it, and Nick fouled out. That was the exception there. But he still put guys around T.O. and said, land the plane for us. And
yeah,
what happened in the Final 420 was getting outscored 21-6. So I think that's sort of the disheartening thing there is more so, one, it's solely a good defensive effort, and two, you want to see T.O. become a trusted set of hands that you know you can rest Ant with. So we'll see if that improves over the next couple of weeks, if he can get that down. I don't think the raw turnover number is going to come down that quickly, but I think it'll be important to look at the next 3 or 4 games and see what his turnover rate is. If it's closer to like 15 or 18, that'll be a step in the right direction. If he can cut it in half over the next, in that sample of games, I think it'll be a positive sign stepping forward for him. But we'll see. But those were my 2 things about garbage time last night. And hopefully that's more productive than just being upset about an esoteric thing like the margin, which I don't think most common fans care about.
So the good news is, and this also happened when they didn't play very well against Southeast Missouri, is they got a game pretty much right away. So Missouri will play South Dakota on a quick turnaround. Ironically enough, so far in KenPom, VMI is listed at 279 in KenPom. South Dakota is listed at 278 in KenPom. So 2 teams that are pretty close to each other, and you're getting that game kind of right after. And I'm not making Prairie View A&M out to be a close game. It wasn't a close game. Missouri was out so comfortably that they could go. Yeah, they could have a 21-6 run the other way and still win by 18 points. So, but it still feels like you want to kind of be a little more assertive in this game, and so I think in those cases it's nice to be able to get right back kind of on the horse, proverbially. And then next week we'll get 2 games. It's Thanksgiving week, feast week. Tuesday, South Carolina State. Friday, Cleveland State. Before, pardon my terminology, before the real games heat up. But realistically, the way things are, Missouri should be 8-0, heading into Notre Dame. Then they have Kansas. Then a couple more home Q4s. Alabama State, Bethune-Cookman. Bethune-Cookman,
they've been feisty.
Put a little feisty. They put a scare into Auburn. And then you get Illinois. The stretch. Good Lord. Stretch, Illinois, Florida, Kentucky. Kentucky, a little questionable. But we did get a chat question. I don't know how much we're going to be able to answer that tonight about how we match up with this year's KU and Illinois teams. I think we'll have plenty of time to kind of preview those. I also think that none of these teams are fully formed yet. From what I've watched, I would say Illinois is probably the closest version of a complete version of themselves, as far as like what you want to be at the end of the year versus what you are now. I don't think Missouri is close to that. I don't think Kansas is close to that.
Well, they got to get Darren Peterson back.
That is a big part of it. Darren Peterson is a pretty big key for them, and he has only played in 2 games so far.
Looked awesome
And
in both of them.
Yeah, well, and so he's the guy that if he's not available, like the math for Kansas changes in a hurry, and
Drastically.
And I think like that's one of those things where very easy, like you flip that game a lot more in Missouri's favor if he's not available. But that's weeks away. We have South Dakota on Thursday. Next Tuesday, South Carolina State, who's they're pretty awful. Cleveland State.
Rob
Summers done a solid job there. They've lost some close games. Got blown out by Northwestern. So yeah, we've got some games that have at least a little intrigue factor. The big thing for me is like I really want to see Honor Batang suit up and play minutes. I would really like to get Trent Pierce healthy. I hope that is able to progress with some expediency. And then, Trent Burns, I think the target for them was always hopefully having him to be able to, be ramped up early December. From everything that we've seen, he's on track for that. So yeah, do you have anything you want to say in the forthcoming? I know you watched a little South Dakota.
South Dakota I think South Dakota will be fun because they play at a perky pace. They play at the 22nd fastest pace nationally, so they are not going to be fazed by how Missouri wants to play fast. They run. Eric Preston, I don't think he is a former JUCO guy, and his experiences. I've got to flip rosters every year, and I've got to be able to teach my team offense really, really quickly and get them settled. So he runs pretty Spartan stuff. Like he runs a lot of 4-out ball screen stuff, a lot of continuity ball screen stuff, things that are going to be quick hitters that are going to kind of get the ball moving side to side. But he wants his guys to play fast. He wants them to get into the paint. So I think stylistically, they're not going to be bothered by how Missouri wants to play this game. They want to run. They want to play early in the clock, just like Missouri does. Unlike VMI, they will have their star, Isaac Bruns, a junior. He's struggling a little bit efficiency-wise, but he's a guy who I think is, like a lot of guys you've seen this, just really kind of crafty, understands how he plays, can play at his own pace. Shoots it pretty well off the clip, but he's more of a guy who wants to try and, I think, attack guys who are his kind of size and athleticism off the bounce and kind of use craftier finishes. We'll see how that plays against Missouri. The big issue for them is they were banking on having a SLU transfer Dotzler play for them this year. Well, he tore his ACL, and they're still kind of looking to figure out who's going to be their second perimeter scorer. And they've got a little bit of size on the interior. They are not Lilliputians like we've seen there, I think 180th in average height. But those guys aren't like really skilled finishers. They're guys that are going to have to score off dump-offs, cuts, putbacks. What they can do is crash the glass, too. So that's going to be interesting. They've got a team that can play at pace. They've got a guy who they trust with 31% usage. They've got some bigs that can board. And they hung around with Creighton for a little bit. Another team that wants to play fast and kind of wants to play the way Missouri does, off secondary breaks, get into action quick. So I think it's a good matchup in the sense of you're going to get to see a team who's not going to be worried by how you play. They can throw a big out there in like Finn's or another guy, Brack, who's like 6'10", and say, oh, you're going to throw Phillips out there? We'll throw our 7-footer out there as well. And we trust our guy to go get misses. So I think it's going to be a good matchup, and it could be a trickier one, maybe than VMI was, because VMI was just like, we got to give it to one dude, let him chuck. There's a little bit more stylistically here that I think could be fun, and, we've seen Missouri in some of these games have slips in focus. They had some slips in focus against Howard. SEMO was an entire night of lack of focus. We saw, garbage time last night. So I think it's a game where I think if you slip up, maybe South Dakota can get a little bit of momentum. They can get a little bit of, confidence going and know that they've got a guy who can go get them offense. But we'll see what they do there. But I think it'll be interesting from that facet. The big thing is if they can get Honor, with the rust knocked off. They need a bigger, longer, more physical wing, probably more so defensively than anything else right now. Because there are some lineups where Missouri is playing a 6'3" Ant Robinson, a 6'3", Jaden Stone, and a 6'4", or a 6'3" Sebastian Mack and a 6'4" Jaden Stone. That's a pretty average sized lineup. If you can get Honor Batang out there at 6'6" on the wing, and another physical defender to go with Sebastian Mack and Ant Robinson, you can start to clean some things up, I think, a little bit at the point of attack where Missouri's been vulnerable at times. Getting Trent Pierce back would be really, really big because he was a really good off-ball defender for Missouri a year ago. You could get him in ball screens and maybe some handoffs, but he was pretty reliable off the ball, closing shooters down. If you can get those two guys back, I think, and I wrote this today, I think that cleans up some of the defensive issues we've seen, but it also keeps Missouri from having to make some pretty binary trade-offs between offense and defense with Jaden Stone and with Sebastian Mack. I think it lets them find a little bit more of a middle way, but that starts with getting Honor ramped up and getting him comfortable. But I'm really interested to see, what it looks like defensively if you could get a bigger, more physical, more athletic kind of wing on the floor, and if that starts to resolve some things. So, interesting opponent, not going to be fazed by Missouri, and we get to see what Honor looks like coming off, a 2 or 3 week layoff. So, reasons to tune in on Thursday night.
Yeah, I was just I brought this up just to share it. This is an incredible list of names.
It's all fantastic.
Yeah, Isaac Bruns, Cameron Fens, Shea Eberwine, great name, Shea Eberwine. Jordan Crawford, kind of boring. Jesse McIntosh. Vince Bezelis, always like
That's
a good
right.
Bezelis. Uzziah Bunton. That's fantastic. Ethan Kaiser. Jake Brack. Boring old Evan Anderson. Ashton Smith. Porter Einen,
I think.
But yeah, some really terrific names. I'm really looking forward to see Uzziah get on the floor. He's a freshman.
Yep.
But this is still a game Missouri should win by 20-plus points. More than that, you're feeling pretty good. KenPom has this as a 24-point loss for South Dakota. So I would hope they're able to do that.
Yeah, but if you look over there, you can see the offensive rebound numbers are pretty good. The one thing that should make Missouri fans happy is look at that 2-point defense for the Yotes. It is they're a little porous inside. That should be good news.
Their free throw defense is also very bad.
I put that on the fans in the building for not doing a good job distracting them. They also don't force a lot of turnovers. So I think if they're going to play in transition, they're going to need to do it on the glass and get out and push that way. So that it'll be interesting to see how they create their pace, but if under the right circumstances, they could be a little bit feisty for Missouri. So I always think teams that are comfortable with Missouri's style and pace won't be fazed, because I don't think Mizzou Arena is going to be packed out for this one either. So we'll see. But I'm not going to dismiss the idea that this could be a little tighter than some expect.
So I think we're going to wrap this up. We're always going to try to keep these within the 30 minutes, and we're right about 38. But we're back weekly, so we're going to do this again next week. We'll talk about South Dakota. We'll take a closer look at what sort of the rest of Feast Week looks for Missouri. Maybe the Magic Man will get to your question, and Chris Washington Jr. just decommitted from Alabama. I think Missouri's probably done in their freshman class. Maybe he just really wants to spend his time in Columbia, Missouri, and we'll find a way to commit at some point. I doubt it. But so if you want to check out Matt's excellent lineup data, it's on Rock M Plus. Go ahead and subscribe. And also, if you just go, you should be able to get notifications and when we do these live broadcasts, even if you're not a subscriber. I still haven't figured out how to make this, make these subscriber only. I think this is part of our like Riverside experience is they don't really have that set up, which is fine. We'll get a few more folks tuned in and say hello. But we'll be back next week with more stuff to talk about. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And until then, see ya. Thank you everyone for tuning into Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock M Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rock M Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. And we'll be back with more episodes of Rock M Radio coming to you soon.